Hi, everyone. So we are starting a new section in our class, and we're going to sort of focus on social and cultural relationships. And this will be good since so much of psychology depends on this basic idea, understanding of human beings working together in context of some sort. So we have to figure out what does it mean for humans to work together, and we also have to talk about what does it mean for the social context to dictate how uh, interactions proceed. Now, this particular set of lectures is going to be very good primer what you can expect later on once you start taking classes like social psychology, which deals in a more in-depth way and in a more in-depth framework on what it means for human beings to interact with other human beings. Right now, you and I are having an interaction, and were this a normal semester, we'd be having this interaction on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. Um, but we influence how we respond to each other. And there are several things that are going on that might dictate the rules for how you and I interact and how we get along or don't get along, right? And so with this chapter here, it's very important that you read it because it's a very good foundation for the rest of psychology. And all psychology on some level deals with human beings in context. So we're going to get out of the lab now and out of talking about experiments, and we're going to talk about human beings in context and how the context dictates how they work together or don't work together. So for today, we're focused on chapter 8, which is behavior in social cultural context. We'll be talking about social forces. We'll be talking about working in groups. We'll be talking about group identity and then group conflict and prejudice. That sets us up nicely for a lot of different areas in psychology for us to talk about. So today we're going to talk a little bit. We'll start this off by going over what it means to discuss social forces. Right? So first, you have to understand that we live in a society that has rules, right? So we live in a society that dictates what we can do, how we are to go about our social lives, and what sort of explicit and implicit cultural conventions exist for us to navigate. Explicit simply means it's well known, it's outside, it's obvious, right? Implicit, though, you might think of as akin to implied, right? What type of implied social interactions are there? For example, there is a strong implicit convention that says, and when I'm in the middle of teaching, you don't get up out of your seat, come over here and just knock me out, right? So there is a cultural convention for that, right? It's not standard. It's not something you're supposed to do. I hope you don't want to do that, but it's not something you're supposed to do, right? So when we talk about these things, we're talking about the idea of social norms, right? What are the normal things that society dictates for us to do? Additionally, social norms go hand in hand with social roles. We have social roles that are dictated by society and they're dictated by culture. For example, there might be social roles that your teacher fulfills that are different from the social roles that your doctor fulfills. Thinking more broadly, your parents have a social role that is different from the social role your rabbi might have, right? Social roles for women might be expected and they might be different than expectations for social roles for men. So the social position is governed by the norms that are established in the context of a society. And then we talk about culture, we're really talking about the set of values, beliefs, customs, and ideals that are shared by members of some community. Values, beliefs, custom, and ideals. And if you look on the slides, you'll see that I didn't put ideals, but you want to add ideals. Values, beliefs, customs, and ideals that are held by most members of some community. These people work together for a common cause They have common belief systems. They have common experiences in the rearing of children. They have common developmental experiences. And working together, they promote within their society values, beliefs, customs, and ideals. So there is a study that I have uploaded to the website that I do want you to look at. So this is Milgram's famous obedience study. And if you've taken AP Psych, and you might have come across it before, but essentially subjects go into a laboratory. Remember, we spoke about the laboratory space. So in this instance, I have a laboratory set up, and I have a machine that is set up, and the machine is designed to give shocks to individuals. There are two roles in this study, right? There's the role of the participant, and there's the role of the learner. Now, in this study, and we didn't cover this last week, but there is a specific role, and the role is called confederate. Now, confederate role doesn't mean what you might think it means. In psychology, someone who is a confederate is someone who was working with the experimenters, but no one knows about it. So in this study, a confederate, an experimental confederate, we might say, takes the role of the learner. So they are always assigned the role of the learner. I bring a participant into my laboratory with another individual in the waiting room, and I say, one of you will be the learner, one of you will be the teacher. The confederate is always the learner. They're always the person that's going to receive the shocks. The participant is always the teacher. They are always the person who is supposed to teach an individual some words. The way that the study works is the teacher must teach the participant words. If the person gets the words wrong, then you're supposed to shock the participant. Every time an individual gets the words wrong, you give them increasingly higher levels of shocks. So, for instance, I ask you the first set of words, you get the words wrong, I give you a shock of 5 volts. On the second time, you get the words right. No shocks. On the third time, you get the words wrong. I'll have to shock you again, but this time instead of giving you the 5 volts from the first trial, and I'll give you 10 volts. And it goes all the way up until it gets to a level of voltage that's undefined and only defined by a skull in XXX. We can assume that that level of voltage probably means it can kill you. So now, the reason I attached the documentary to this week's module is because you can actually see what's going on. I have to kind of rush through this study, and there's a lot of things that I'm not accounting for, but you'll see that in the documentary. As an individual gets higher and higher levels of shock, the central question, the big question, remember, you always want to ask what the big question is. At what point in the study of increased shocking voltage will an individual stop shocking the person? In other words, how high can we expect the average person to go before they realize that the other person is in pain? For this study here, everyone in the study shocked another subject at least once, and 2/3 gave all levels of shock, even though many were upset at being asked to do so. Why were they upset at being asked to do so? Because as you'll see in the video, the higher and higher voltage that individuals receive for getting a wrong answer, the more that they scream out in pain. Now, before we get into the ethical issues of this study, I failed to mention one thing, which is the machine does not actually give volts. Remember, the person who is the learner who's messing up is a confederate. So they're acting with the experimenter. So even though you press the button and it looks like a shock's going through, no actual shock's happening. But the person is acting and they're screaming in pain. By the time you get up to 300, 350 volts, person is screaming in pain, saying, "Let me out of here, I have a heart condition." Question: would you shock a person with electricity who was an elderly man who you knew had a heart condition? No, you probably wouldn't. Why? Because you're a kind person. But in this study, people were happy to do so. Well, that's not true. That's not fair. That's not fair. They weren't happy to do so, but they did so. So 2/3 gave at least all the higher levels of shock. And then one of the things that this study showed was that obedience is a function of situation. We'll get into this a lot more in social, but there's many things that affected the level to which individuals were willing to shock another person. Right? How the setup of the room was, if the individual was wearing a lab coat, if an individual, if the experimenter was right beside the individual, individuals would say, "I don't want to give a shock anymore," and the experimenter would say, "No, you have to, because you're an experiment," and they would. We tend to listen to authority figures who tell us to harm another person. So the nature of the relationship to the authority helps to influence that level of obedience as well. So here you can kind of see the setup of it. So this person is a confederate. They're working with the experimenter. This is the experimenter, right? And then this is the shock setup. You press one of these buttons, a light lights up, you hear a sound, and it means in the other room you just shocked the heck out of someone. This right here, so increasingly high voltage, and then right here, this last button here is a triple X. So oftentimes an individual there'd be several different variations of the study, right? So sometimes individuals in the other room, sometimes you have to forcefully in the same room with them, give them shocks. And there's a setup for that to where you're actually seeing the person who you're shocking. Participants were more likely to disobey orders to give shocks when the experimenter left the room, the victim was right there in the room, experimenters issue conflicting demands, the person ordering them to continue was just an ordinary person, so not dressed up in a lab suit, right? And the participant worked with peers to refuse to go together. If you were in a room with other people who were giving shocks and someone rose up and said, "We're not doing this anymore," you are more likely to say, "I'm not going to do this anymore." That's pretty powerful. Now, this right here is the prison study. This is the Stanford prison study. And this is also something we get into a lot in social, right? This study is really interesting. Because what I can do is I can tell you that you have the role of a certain individual, and you will get so lost in the role that you will forget your own identity. So in this particular study, participants are randomly assigned to the role of guard or prisoner, right? Prisoners became distressed, helpless, apathetic, rebellious, right? Guards became one of the following: nice, are tough, but fair, and tyrannical, right? The tyrannical guards were normal human beings who got so lost in the role. They got so lost in the role of being a prison guard, they became quite sadistic in how they interacted with other human beings. The study had to be stopped after 6 days because individuals became so lost in the role, including the experimenter, Dr. Zimbardo himself. They became so lost in the role that individuals were beginning to suffer psychological problems. People obey, and they tend to obey because they want to avoid punishment and out of a respect for authority, right? Because of entrapment also as well, which is this gradual process in which individuals escalate their commitment to a course of action and justify their investment of time, money, or effort. In other words, it's kind of like the foot in the door phenomenon. You've been doing increasingly difficult things, and you have pushed your own limits of what you're willing to do so far that you're now in a place where you have to continue on. It's like planning a bank robbery. You've been planning a bank robbery, and don't go telling the dean that Dr. Sims says that I should go plan a bank robbery. It's not what Dr. Sims is saying. But let's say you plan a bank robbery and you've been planning it for weeks, for months, and the night before the actual robbery, you get cold feet and want to pull out. Right? Your crew doesn't like that very much because their entire plan is based on you having a specific role, and it's hard for you to get away from that. So you've entrapped yourself because there was opportunity to stop getting increasingly more involved, and you didn't take that opportunity. So you tend to obey the rest of your gang, and you tend to rob this bank, right? So you can entrap yourself by investing too much of your time, investment, and effort into this endeavor. It's not good for you. All that goes against what you believe. Social influences. So you see a car crash, right? And when we talk about attribution theory, we'll get into more in depth later on. More than likely if you take social. But when it comes to attribution, I am essentially interested in what was the causal events that made a thing happen, right? So you're sitting outside, you're drinking some tea, right? Some boba tea. And all of a sudden you look to your side, all of a sudden you see a BMW careen all the way down the street, jump the curb, flip, and crash. Now, hopefully you take out your phone and call 911. Hopefully you don't take out your phone and film it. But you take out your phone, you call 911, and then later they're like, what happened, right? Now, there are two different ways to sort of view what you've seen. You could take a dispositional standpoint, right? Which says that the person crashed the car because he is a careless driver who never watches out for other cars. In other words, it's who the person is. It's who the person is that caused the wreck. Versus situational, where you're like, no, he saw a squirrel he was trying to avoid, and that's what caused the wreck. Situational. This positional versus situation is something we see a lot of. Either someone did something and the cause was internal to who they were, so internal causes, right? Or it's because of something that happened in the outside world that caused it. I'm supposed to be teaching this class at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's 8:20 and they haven't shown up yet. You have a choice. There is a dispositional way of viewing that. Dr. Sims is a jerk. He doesn't care about us. He doesn't care about our time. So he didn't show up here because we don't really matter to him. Well, I must certainly hope you don't take that standpoint. But it could be situational too, right? Dr. Sims is stuck in traffic due to an 18-wheeler crashing into the median. So either the cause is internal because of who I am, or it's external due to what's going on around. So when we talk about attributions, then one of the things that we see a lot of is attributional error. When we tend to explain other people's behavior, right? and we overestimate the personality factors and underestimate the influence of the situation. Now, this is interesting. It's interesting because we only do that to other people. When it comes to ourselves, we flip this. When it comes to ourselves, we overestimate the influence of the situation and we underestimate our personality factors. Think about that. So we've spoken a little bit about biases, right? And there's a few different types. So when we talk about self-serving biases, we're talking about the bias to choose the most flattering and forgiving attributions of our own lapses, right? We also talk about the bias that we are better, smarter, kinder, more attractive than other people, as well as the bias to believe that the world is fair. This just world hypothesis. So the world's been fair to me, therefore the world is fair to everybody. And if you have a just world hypothesis, you really struggle with the idea that other people um, have tried as hard as you, but have just not been successful due to events outside their own control. If you think the world's a safe and a fair place, you don't understand. You have a very difficult time understanding why individuals can't just pull themselves up by their bootstraps when things go wrong, like you did. So this will be in the book, and this is on the slide. So we won't spend a lot of time here, but just look at the different types of attributions that there are, and try to see if you have found yourself being a slave to any of these. Let's keep it moving. I will say this about chapter 8. Um, and I find myself struggling because chapter 8 is literally the entirety of social psychology in one chapter. So I am literally giving you 16 weeks of information in 1 or 2 lectures. That is difficult to do. And I feel myself, there's all these things I want to say. And I'm like, it's an intro class. Can't say it. Just keep it moving. So let's jump ahead, talk about attitudes, right? Attitudes are simply beliefs about people, groups, ideas, or activities. So they can be explicit. So these are the attitudes that we say that we have and hold about someone. They can also be implicit. They're the ones that are internal to us and are below the level of consciousness. We can also experience cognitive dissonance, right? Cognitive dissonance is a state of tension that occurs when a person simultaneously holds two cognitions that are psychologically inconsistent, or when the person's belief is incongruent with their behavior. So let's say you support the vows of marriage that you've taken with your partner. At the same time, you have a secret Tinder account and you are cheating on your partner with other people. Cognitive dissonance is when you have these two beliefs that don't go together and it causes stress because of the inconsistency between your attitudes and your behavior. So in 8.2, there's this ideal of self-justification, and we do a lot of this. We find reasons for why we did something that we don't like. We struggle finding reasons why somebody else did something we don't like. If you don't like it when people dye their hair and someone dyes their hair blue, there's all these kind of ideas that you have about why they did that and what's wrong with them. Yet you find yourself in a situation, and many things can happen because you're college students, find yourself in some situation where you need to dye your hair blue. And you do so, and you justify that the reason you did it is the exception and it's acceptable. It's different than what other people are doing it. So you might think of this attitude towards cheating. It's not so unethical, right? I need this grade, right? Doesn't cheat. Cheating is really wrong. Everyone loses, right? Or it could also be cheating is not a good thing, but it's not a bad thing. It could also be cheating in the terms of being with a significant other. It wasn't bad. It's okay. It didn't really affect them any, right? All right, let's move on quickly to shifting opinions and bedrock beliefs. So this familiarity effect um, um, is this effect where the more you see a person, item, or product, the more familiar you are with it, and the more you think about it favorably. Right. So one of my neighbors uh, did not know the individual very well at all. Started talking, and now we see each other. We say hey every day. We speak. We have a really great friendship. Right. So the more you see a thing, the more you like it. You see a lot of this in politics. An individual comes out of the ether and says, I'm going to run for president. You have no idea who this person is. But the more you see them, the more they talk about their ideas, the more they talk about their policies, do you find yourself really, really liking them? And then a couple of months down the road, you find yourself donating money to their website, to their campaign, right? Uh, Flavors of ice cream. You might think, that's not really something I want to taste. Then the more you eat it, the more you like it, the more you tend to support that, right? And then there's this validity effect. The tendency of people to believe that a statement is true or valid simply because it has been repeated many times, right? So we're kind of seeing this in real time right now. No matter what side of the political aisle you're on, a common statement that is being said a lot is the current president, Joe Biden, did not actually win the presidency, and the election was stolen. Independent of what side of the political aisle you're on, what we have seen is we have seen an increase in people who are saying this. He didn't win the presidency was stolen. This is separate. This is a separate thing, separate away from actual numerical statistical fact. We're not talking about that at this point. We are just saying the more people have heard that, the larger the amount of people who are repeating it, away from whatever the actual factual statistical numbers are. The reason is we like to believe what other people are believing. There has started to be a movement of people who believe that the earth is flat. Again, independent of whatever side of the political aisle you're on. I'm not talking about your politics at this point. I'm talking about the psychological foundations of some beliefs. Well, flat earthers have grown in number over the last few years. The more people have said it, the more people believe it. The QAnon conspiracy theory is a great real world example of validity effect. People like to be a part of a belief system. People like to believe things that other people believe. Those who don't like to believe things on their own. The more it has been repeated that there is a secret cabal of politicians who are assaulting children, the more people have begun to believe it. The more people, the more websites have gone online. And one of the things that we've seen is that even in the face of actual facts, people have held on to the belief so strongly that they disregard the facts so that they can continue to believe with others. So this validity effect is quite strong. This validity effect is hard to change. You can we're starting to move, and I mentioned this in my graduate class a couple of weeks ago, starting to move to a post-factual society where you can present actual facts to people who will say, I don't believe that. I believe what I believe already. I don't believe your facts. I believe what I feel. And this validity effect kind of explains some of that. So, here is a graphical representation, right, of the proportion of variance accounted for, right? So remember we spoke a little bit about heredity, right? So and heritability, if you don't remember, is sort of the proportion of a gene within a certain population, right? And so people who have the same sort of genes, right, might believe at a 0.4 correlation in school pair, but those people who grew up in a non-shared environment might not believe that as strongly. In other words, for this concept of school pair, genes account for more, why individuals believe in that, and environment accounts for less. Now, environment accounts for more when it comes to beliefs endorsing the draft and censorship, as well as segregation, right? So one of the things that you should get from this right here is that non-shared environments account for a larger proportion of belief systems as compared to genes or gene frequency in the population. So when we think about whether or not an individual will support social change or support the system, that's kind of what we're thinking here. All right. So moving right along, we also talk about this idea of persuasion. Now, brainwashing, I don't think that's actually a real thing. I can't wash your brain. That's ridiculous. But I can set you on a path where there are some complex things that you believe in spite of what the facts say. And I can, through the use of persuasion, get you to understand or believe those things. I can, through a number of methods, get you to do almost anything if I misuse psychology and how I want you to learn something, do something. I can indoctrinate you, right? I can do so by you being subjected to entrapment. So I get you to get yourself in a situation that you can't get out of, right? I do a lot of blaming, right? We've seen this a lot in the political sphere over the last few years as well. It's those people who are causing me to feel this way. It's those people who are causing you to feel this way. We've seen this a lot lately when we look at our Asian American population, right? It's those people who are making us sick. We've seen this a lot when it comes to our Hispanic population. It's those people who are taking our jobs, right? And so if I can indoctrinate you enough to blame someone for your situation in life, that is enough to get you to be persuaded to figure out a way to retaliate against those people. Right? If I can give you a new identity and offer you salvation, right? So I can give you a new way to escape your old life, and in this new way, give you the promise of starting things anew, because your old life is so terrible. And the person's access to disconfirming, dissident information is severely controlled. When you think about the terrorist attacks of 9/11, those were terrible. I lived through those, and those were terrible. That was years of training, of saying that it's the Americans who have destroyed your lives. And if we attack their centers of economic growth, we can finally get back at them with the harm that they've caused you. If you're hearing that message over and over for years, what might that do in terms of making you want to fight against another individual or another group of people? We've become more polarized politically than ever. If you're a conservative, okay, one of the things you're hearing over and over again is that liberals are destroying the country. If you're liberal, one of the things you hear over and over again that conservatives are ruining the country. So we've become more polarized than ever. And when we become polarized, we tend to stick to our echo chambers, right? If you're a conservative, you tend to only listen to conservative news outlets, missing vital information the liberal outlets might be able to give you about the current situations. It's the same thing in the reverse. If you are a liberal, you tend to avoid conservative news outlets, therefore completely closing yourself off to listening to the other side. It's happening more and more and more. You see this in Congress, you see this in our day-to-day politics. You see this especially so in Texas politics. So I can also, and mass suicides are a good way to think about the power that persuasion could have. Jim Jones in the 1970s convinces an entire group of people to drink a certain drink, and that all of them will die. And when they all die, their spirits will rise up and be on a spaceship together. Now, that I don't think this photo doesn't actually depict that particular mass suicide, but there's been so many mass suicides that this is another one where some speaker who was very much so valued could persuade people over time, you need to kill yourself and follow me. And large groups of them did. Okay, let's stop here for a moment and we'll get back and then we'll finish out this chapter. So let's go give you a break and then we will return. All right, everybody, we're back now. So we're going to go to 8.3 and talk about individuals within groups. Now, conformity is a topic that we will touch on a lot, right? And here's the thing. Human beings like to do what other human beings are doing. Everyone in this photo wants to wear a suit or wear something that's professionally considered professional dress. Imagine someone in this photo decides to show up here in a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. They're going to be ostracized. People are going to be wondering, what are they doing? So the reason we conform is because we want to be accepted, and also we have a need for information, right? We might not know what's going on, and we might not know what's happening, but when we conform, we follow what everyone else is doing. Sometimes people have more information than we do, and so we look to them to tell us what we should be doing. If you show up here to this place and you're dressed regularly, you will realize quite quickly you need to return to your dorm, put on something professional, and then come back. Groupthink happens when the tendency of members of a group think alike for the sake of harmony and they suppress disagreement, right? So Challenger explosion. People, this happened in 1986, and essentially the shuttle was not ready to be utilized in space, but people did not want to descent, so they went with it, and then it went up and exploded. If people had dissented, more people would have lived. Same thing for the invasion of Iraq, right? The invasion of Iraq doesn't really have very much to do with the 2001 9/11 attack. But people said we have to go into Iraq and invade, and we have to take over the government. If people had dissented, there would not have been such a catastrophic loss of life in the Iraqi citizenry. Same thing for anti-masking at political rallies, right? If people were to stop to think for a second, then we wouldn't see such large upticks in death that take place after political rallies happen. So in groupthink, people just want harmony, but they're not actually critically thinking about what is necessary and what's the right thing to do. There is this ideal called the wisdom of the crowd, right? And basically, it's the tendency for members to avoid taking actions because they assume that other individuals absolutely will. So this individual has fallen and she can't get up, and everyone sees it and they notice it, and they keep walking past her because they think someone else will do this. You see this a lot. A great place that you see this a lot is in New York City, when you are on the subway line and someone is drunk on the subway or high or dancing or falling down. People just walk, and in many cases walk over you because they feel like someone else will actually help you. There are so many, I'm really heavy into true crime stuff. There are so many cases where there's a victim who is screaming in broad daylight, help me, help me, help me. People hear it and they look and they don't do anything. Just kind of sit there and stare. And the person is murdered. People diffuse responsibility because they feel like someone else will take care of it. I don't have to. De-individuation happens when there's a loss of an awareness of one's own individuality. In other words, it's no longer about me, the person, it's about us as a group doing a thing. We saw this recently, right? We saw this recently in our country, where it was no longer about individual people making a political statement, but all of us together doing this one thing here and feeling as if none of us will be caught because we're all doing it together. So in de-individuation, you lose your sense of self, and the only thing that you think about is you being a part of a group. So as we said before, the presence of others affects our behavior, so we won't spend too much time on this. But there's also these two things here, which is altruism and dissent, right? Altruism is simply doing good for another person for no reason. And then dissent is being able to bravely express disagreement at large with what the group is doing. There are certain times when these things take place, right? And there's factors that can overcome bystander apathy and increase likelihood, right? Such as your perception that someone needs help or intervention, as well as the cultural norms you have, which encourage you to take action. Now, we live in a society that doesn't necessarily promote helping another person in need. There are those other societies where helping a person in need is one of the first things that you do. Right? If you go on YouTube and you watch these videos of car crashes all over the world, right? Someone crashes their vehicle in Russia, all the other cars stop driving and run over and help the person. Versus in the United States, someone crashes their car, people look and they film it and then they keep driving. So there's a cultural aspect to how we function in this society. Also, again, remember, we like to do things that other people are doing. So if someone helps us, we have an ally, we're more likely to assist and help other people who are in need. And then we can become entrapped in helping people. So entrapment can work in two ways. We're entrapped into doing something that we disagree with, but we could also be entrapped into helping others. If all the cars around you are helping someone, then if you keep driving, then it looks like something is wrong with you. So you can be forced to conform to helping others if other people around you are doing the same. So now we get into the idea of groups, right? There are many social identities that we have. So one of the most important ones is our ethnic identity. If we can establish a strong ethnic identity, it tells us something a little bit about our culture as well, right? Additionally, we have to balance acculturation where perhaps our ethnic identity is not in the majority. And in this case here, you have an issue. You have to find your sense of self within your ethnic identity, but you also must, or you find yourself trying to balance your own ethnic identity with the ethnic identity and the social identities of the culture that you are now a part of. In some ways, you have to take on the cultural values of the greater culture in order to successfully navigate that culture. Ethnocentrism is this belief that your own ethnic group, nation, or religion is superior than others. It's also a belief that other groups have problems and that you have the ability to rule and direct over them. So, this is a very famous experiment. This is the experiment at Robert's Cave, where simply you have two groups of individuals. You have your eagles and you have your rattlers, right? And what they did is they took these two separate groups and then they said, we're going to introduce cooperative activities. In other words, we're going to introduce activities that force you to cooperate together. And in the beginning, these two groups are told negative things about the other group. So these two groups don't like each other, and the percentage of cooperation that happens is very low. But then after you start introducing activities which forces the two groups to work together, right? Then you see that there's a higher percentage of working together that takes place. And you find that you're more likely to have a close friend or a best friend in the other group. The Rattlers were more likely to find a best friend in the Eagles, right? The Eagles, even though they increased from the beginning of the experiment until after the experiment when they've done the cooperative activities, they increased in having a best friend who were Rattlers, but not as much as the Rattlers were. Let's continue. Stereotypes. Stereotypes aren't necessarily bad, and sometimes they're accurate, but they distort reality. Stereotypes exaggerate differences between groups, produce selective perceptions, and underestimate differences within the stereotyped group. If you have a stereotype about a certain group, then you're not accounting for the variance that takes place in that group. Group conflict. So, prejudice has several known psychological causes, as well as social causes, as well as economic causes, and that's a big one. And then, of course, cultural and natural causes. So, prejudice happens due to a variety of reasons. So, we can measure prejudice in 5 ways. First, we can look at microaggressions. And microaggressions we can think of as these um, small discriminatory attacks against other people that take place. They're minor, not in impact, but in scale, right? So, for instance, a professor in class who refuses to call on Black females, okay, that could be considered a microaggression. Another microaggression might be telling an Asian person that they speak good English or asking them where they come from. So unequal treatment also, right? So you talk about prejudice, you treat one group simply better than the other group. You give access to resources more to one group than you do to the other group. Measures of what people do when they are stressed or angry, right? So how you qualify anger as an emotion in people could lead to prejudice, right? So, for example, a white male gets angry and it might be considered justifiable or righteous. a Black female gets angry, it might be considered um, that she's antisocial or that she's aggressive. So how we qualify and understand that helps us to understand those prejudicial beliefs. How we measure brain activity, right? So we might have differential physiological ways of understanding differences in brain activity amongst several different ethnicities. We might qualify brain activity on one scale for one group of people to be high, and on that same scale for another group to be low. And then measures of implicit attitudes. This is really important, right? I can say a thing, but I can feel something differently. And you see a lot of this when it comes to actually liberal individuals who say we support equal or we support equality between all ethnicities in the United States. And yet, on certain measures, you capture that many of those beliefs are actually quite racist towards one group of people or quite discriminatory towards another. So, when we talk about performative anti racism, you saw a lot of this sort of come up in the months after the George Floyd killing. The individuals said that they promoted equality, but some of the things they were saying on social media actually goes against that. You see a lot of that in liberal circles. IAT has been receiving a lot of interest in the last few years. I think what I'm going to do is have you actually do an IAT in the course at some point, and then maybe write about your experiences in doing so. Okay, so we'll do that. This is the test is as designed is supposed to measure implicit attitudes you have. So attitudes you have about a group of people below the level of consciousness. Now, there's some people who've had issues with that because it could be that what it's measuring is exposure to other people, right? So if you have attitudes towards, for example, disabled people, it could mean that you are discriminatory against them, or it could mean that you've never been really exposed to disabled people in your life. And that will affect how you understand and answer those questions. Finger pointing takes place a lot, right, with conflict. And so to reduce that conflict, we need the groups to have legal status, economic opportunities, and power that's equal, as well as moral, legal, and economic support on both sides. Additionally, there have to be many activities to socialize and work together, right? So we have to find opportunities to see eye to eye on certain things. And then both sides must cooperate towards working together for a common goal. When we have cross-ethnic friendships, we find that minority students' well-being tends to be higher in terms of their satisfaction with the university, as well as their feelings of belonging. In other words, it's better for you to not only stick to groups who are your same ethnicity while you're in college for a total overall satisfaction with your schooling. Now, we do we must question human nature, right? Humans, all of us have the potential for good and evil. I have the potential to murder someone. I have the potential to save someone who was in a burning car. I have the potential to jump in the way of someone who is going to get harmed. Instead, I get harmed instead. I have the potential to see someone getting harmed and continue to walk and pretend that this doesn't affect me. Human nature as a whole is interesting and very diverse. We have to continue to keep that in mind. So, as you think about psychology, I want you to think about the cultural differences that we see and how social cultural research helps us to appreciate these cultural differences and how we understand behavior, values, attitudes, and ideals. And I want you to understand how socially and socioculturally we can Avoid jumping to conclusions about group differences. Okay, this was a whirlwind lecture. I essentially gave you the entirety of social psychology in one lecture. So there's just too much to delve into for this one chapter for us. But please, please, please explore these issues further. Please take social psychology at some point. I hope that you have a great week, and I bid you adieu, and I will talk to you later.